All right, folks, you've been watching a special report on our breaking news. A judge that was appointed by former President Donald Trump has just dismissed the classified documents case against the former president. Following this and more from Milwaukee is our political correspondent, Caitlin Huey-Burns. She is outside of the Republican National Convention, which is getting underway. So, Caitlin, we were talking about this before the special report. Again, the reporting is, it's not exactly clear how Jack Smith is going to respond to this, but as you heard from our legal contributor, Jessica Levinson, who we're going to be speaking to in just a little bit, this did come as a surprise, but perhaps the Trump campaign, for them, it's a welcome surprise.
A welcome surprise indeed. And again, Vlad, we're still waiting to hear any official word, which we'll likely hear soon from the campaign, but no doubt taking this as a win because this was a significant case, as you just heard outlined there. Of course, there have been 4 cases laid out against Donald Trump, 2 in the states and 2 federal cases. This was a very serious one and something that a lot of Republicans had been concerned about. Now, there are going to be questions coming, especially from Democrats, about where is the level of accountability for the former president then. So we're waiting to see kind of what that looks like. But given that the assassination attempt is hovering over all political conversation right now, how you navigate that kind of messaging remains to be seen. We talk about a lot over the past several years how we're often in kind of unprecedented territory. This certainly is one of those moments as well.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns for us outside of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, where Caitlin, you and I had expected to talk about what is taking place today and over the next couple of nights. But this breaking news just happened, came into the CBS newsroom, so we're all over it. We'll speak to you a little bit later in the hour or throughout the day. Caitlin, as always, we appreciate you. Let us bring in one of my favorite CBS News contributors, CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson, who always is able to provide clarity around these very complicated legal issues. Jessica joins us now to break this breaking news down. So first of all, Jessica, I just want for people to understand the legal argument that Judge Aileen Cannon is making here. What is the Appointments Clause of the Constitution, and how is she applying it to this?
So the Appointments Clause is a part of the Constitution that tells us how we can appoint certain people to work in our government. And the question is essentially, is this the type of appointment where you need Senate confirmation? For instance, think about a federal judge where you need the advice and consent of the Senate. Or is this the type of appointment where Congress gives the president the authority to do this on his own? And what Judge Aileen Cannon is saying this morning is the way Jack Smith was appointed without the advice and consent of the Senate, that was improper, and that Congress had that Congress had not empowered a president to create a special counsel. So that's number one with respect to the Appointments Clause, really saying that just the way we picked, not Jack Smith in particular, but the way we picked a special counsel to have the power to pursue this case, it was improper. Think about Merrick Garland, the Attorney General. He needs to be approved by the Senate, the advice and consent of the Senate. And so what Judge Aileen Cannon is saying here is that Jack Smith was not appointed through the proper channels. That's number one. Number two, she says there's a problem with how this office was funded. That's the Appropriations Clause. So we know that Congress has the power to spend money. Congress has the power of the purse. And she said, but I don't have to get into that really, because I already found that with respect to the Appointments Clause, there's a problem and the remedy is to dismiss. One thing, Vlad, I want to mention is this is typically something we don't talk about. I would say our general understanding is that special counsels are validly appointed and that you don't need to go, for instance, to the Senate for advice and consent. But what we heard during the oral arguments in the Supreme Court immunity case is Justice Clarence Thomas saying, maybe we should talk about how Jack Smith was appointed. And he brings up this appointments issue. He then writes separately in his opinion in the immunity case about this issue. I think he's really telegraphing to judges like Aileen Cannon, I think there's a problem here. She picked up on all of those crumbs. And today we have, I think, frankly, a fairly extraordinary decision.
So I don't know the history of the detailed history of special counsels in American history, Jessica, but my mind is sort of wandering back to folks like Ken Starr or even Robert Mueller. You know, did Justice Thomas have an issue? I don't remember if I'm trying to think, he was, what, in the mid-1980s he would have been appointed to the Supreme Court. But did he have a problem when Ken Starr was investigating former President Bill Clinton? Did any member of the Supreme Court raise an issue with Robert Mueller? I'm just trying to understand if all of a sudden we have this coincidence that Justice Thomas highlights and sort of telegraphs to the rest of the judiciary that he has a problem all of a sudden with the way we appoint special counsels, which historically has not been a problem.
It's a really important question, and I'll kind of answer it and not answer it by saying this. The regulations or the law actually changed after Kenneth Starr. My understanding is that Kenneth Starr was actually an independent counsel, and there were some differences with respect to his purview and how he functioned. And then after that experience, we changed the law. So now Robert Mueller and Jack Smith are special counsels. So that's number one, in the sense of, you know, you're asking a really important question, which again is, well, why now? Why does this come up all of a sudden? So there were some differences. Now, were those differences that were big enough that if you see a constitutional question with the appointments clause, that you wouldn't bring it up? And the answer is, I don't know. Now, in addition, we didn't have a case that asked whether or not a president enjoyed immunity from criminal prosecution prior to this time, meaning, and again, really important question, but Justice Thomas didn't bring up this issue in a bankruptcy case or in a tax clause case. He brought it up in a case where the question was about a criminal prosecution that Jack Smith had brought the special counsel. So if you are going to bring it up, that was the moment to do that. So yes, I understand people can think, and I think there's, you know, something there. Well, we've had special counsels or independent counsels for a long time. And I would say, yes, but maybe not the moment for the Supreme Court, or at least one Supreme Court justice, to say, I think I have an issue here. Frankly, that's why the immunity decision was a matter of first impression, because we had just never been there. Can a president be subject to criminal prosecution? Is there some or absolute immunity? And that's the moment when you would bring up a question like this.
All right, Jessica, stand by. I have a lot of other questions for you, including a little bit about who Judge Aileen Cannon is, her affiliation with the Federalist Society. But I want to bring in congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane, who is standing by outside of the would-be assassin's home in Butler, Pennsylvania. He's been covering this documents case. Also joining me is CBS News legal contributor and attorney Katrina Kaufman. We're going to chat with her a little bit as well. But Scott, over to you first. So you just heard Jessica breaking down sort of the legal analysis of what this means and what it means going forward. Give us a sense of what this means politically for former President Trump.
The very moment in which there has been this public urging to tamp down the passions and cool things off, when Judge Cannon just struck a nerve with this ruling. This is a palpable, a visceral issue for so many people, because this is the first ever federal criminal case brought against a former U.S. president. That search of Mar-a-Lago happened 2 years ago next month, and the allegations are pretty damning that the former president had classified records knowingly that he wasn't supposed to have, had knowingly had records in a vulnerable place out there in Mar-a-Lago, which is visited by so many people. And there were concerns among Democrats and President Biden's supporters that Judge Cannon, a Trump appointee, was slow-walking this case, moving it so methodically, so diligently as to render it moot before the election, to make it impossible for there to be a trial before the election. She was under scrutiny for the way she was handling this case in the first place. Now she has dismissed the indictment altogether. Let's flip the coin over. Republicans have accused Jack Smith of politicizing his office, that he was appointed as a political motive to try to take down Donald Trump, the likely nominee in 2024. So Republicans have been trying to defund this prosecution through their tethers of the U.S. House and their control of the U.S. House. So Judge Cannon has just done more than that. She has knocked the case down in Florida. And Vlad, if I could impose, since we have Jessica, a question I'd love to ask her is, what impact this could have on the special counsel who has successfully prosecuted Hunter Biden in Delaware?
That is a great question. Jessica, let's toss it over to you because we can do that here at CBS News 24/7. Did you hear that question from Scott?
I did hear that question. I was trying to race through Judge Aileen Cannon's 93-page ruling. And what I hear her saying is that with respect to this special counsel, the problem with the appointments clause is that Congress didn't give the authority for this appointment. And if that is the case, then I would say, yes, we are having a question about other special counsels as well. So obviously, Jack Smith was appointed, and he has pursued the D.C. election interference case and also this Mar-a-Lago case. But then you have to go back to other special counsels as well. Now, I should pause here and say there could be a difference in the funding mechanism for the special counsel that was overseeing Hunter Biden. But to Scott's excellent question, I do think it calls into question the way we appoint and empower special counsels, period.
So, Scott, that's an interesting question as to whether or not this will apply to the special counsel investigating the president's son, Hunter Biden. The other question that I think that is going to be interesting to hear from your sources once they start reaching out to you or once you start reaching out to them on the Hill is we'd heard in the wake of this would-be assassination attempt on former President Trump's life that that both the president, the former president, and members of the political class were going to try to tamp down some of the rhetoric. But when you see a very coincidentally timed decision on a very politically charged legal challenge that the former president is facing, does it give fuel to Democrats and members of Congress who are Democrats that look for people who are trying to make a decision about who to vote for in November? First, you have the Supreme Court ruling that the president, the office of the president, has almost all-powerful immunity protection from prosecution. And now you're dismissing charges that were very, very serious against a former president. If you're a Democrat, you're signaling this is the early signs of an imperial presidency should Donald Trump be reelected. Are we going to see again a shift where they say, look, we have to continue to attack the record, the policies that this former president is putting forth?
That's what's been fueling the political arguments before the assassination attempt, the Supreme Court ruling and this argument from Democrats that Donald Trump would be a dictator above the law. Not sure how they're going to navigate and negotiate that political argument in the wake of Saturday's shooting here in Pennsylvania. But this court order from Judge Aileen Cannon is right along that line.
All right, Scott McFarland for us. Scott, as always, we appreciate you, brother, doing double duty. We appreciate that so much. Thank you very much. We pointed to the fact that CBS News legal contributor and attorney Katrina Kaufman is joining this conversation. Katrina, you as well as Jessica have been reading this decision from Judge Cannon. You were inside the courtroom for all of these arguments. Was this the conclusion that you were expecting, having heard as an attorney, those arguments made in a courtroom?
Yes and no. Regarding the appointment of Jack Smith, I'm very surprised that she dismissed on this basis. Regarding the appropriations clause, which she talks about in this, she says that Jack Smith was wrongly funded through the permanent indefinite appropriation. That I'm not quite as surprised by, because she did seem very skeptical about where this funding was coming from, the fact that the way it was established has actually lapsed over time, the original law for that. And there was a lot of discussion about if they had to fund Jack Smith in a new way, how would the DOJ handle that aspect of it? So I'm less surprised by that, although she actually doesn't go as much into that aspect of this ruling, because she said since Jack Smith was unlawfully appointed, she doesn't even need to delve into her full reasoning behind the funding issue. But I am quite surprised, having been in that courtroom, heard those arguments, that this is where we are now. And just to go off of what you were just talking about, given the immunity ruling, and always this has been potentially one of the strongest cases against former President Donald Trump. This issue happened after he had left the presidency, so there are a lot of arguments that this immunity ruling would not apply here because it was post-presidency obstruction of and retaining of classified documents. And now this case has been dismissed on the first day of the Republican National Convention. It feels very significant. Also, having read through this order a bit, there was part that struck me because you and Jessica were talking about historical precedent. And that was one of the arguments that we heard in that courtroom, that this is what's been done over time. This goes back to Nixon, even under Trump himself. They appointed special counsels in this way. And she says that that history does not supplant the fact that there's not the textual basis for this appointment, and that there's just been an ad hoc pattern with little judicial scrutiny. So clearly Judge Cannon thinks that she is now applying that proper scrutiny to this issue.
So of course, the question then, Katrina, before we bring Jessica back into this discussion is this case completely dead in the water if the ruling is that the special counsel was not appropriately appointed and that you would need the United States Senate to actually appoint a special counsel? Well, that can certainly happen, but it won't be before the election, obviously. And so the question is there enough political will to go through that process in an election year? Or is there some kind of mechanism that Jack Smith can employ to keep this investigation underway, or to keep the investigation going?
Jack Smith can absolutely appeal this to the 11th Circuit, and then it will be up to the 11th Circuit to decide whether they want to stay this ruling from Judge Cannon while they assess this issue. And I think we could see this elevated all the way to the Supreme Court. But as you said, it seems more and more unlikely that there's any way this case can move forward or begin before the election. So that in itself is significant and a pattern now with all of these cases.
All right, Katrina Kaufman for us. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. Are we going back to Jessica Levinson, or? All right, Jessica, I want to thank you as well for spending some time with us talking about this very, very important breaking news. We appreciate your analysis as always. Let's bring in congressional correspondent Nicole Killian, who's following this on Capitol Hill. Nicole, reactions from Congress.
Well, as you can imagine, particularly among congressional Republicans, more specifically, a number of House Republicans have already put out a post, praising this dismissal. Most notably, Congressman Jim Jordan, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, calling this a big win for the former president. Of course, Chair Jordan had started a probe into the special counsel and this investigation in particular. And, we know House Republicans, as well as congressional Republicans writ large, had really been highly critical of the special counsel, accusing the Biden administration of lawfare against the former president for Jack Smith's investigation, as well as the number of other prosecutions against the former president. So I guess the question here on the Hill is whether or not congressional Republicans will stand down on some of their investigations or keep going. Obviously, we know that this decision will likely be appealed potentially or litigated further. But certainly for now, many Republicans consider this as a significant victory.
And so, Nicole, you probably heard, I don't know if you did, sort of the back and forth that we had with Scott and with Jessica Levinson about what this potentially could mean for other special counsels, including, obviously, the one investigating the president's son, Hunter Biden. Again, if you're an American and you're watching this and you're seeing, forget your political persuasion, but you're sort of seeing what many are calling the weaponization of the Justice Department, in which political opponents investigate each other, they investigate family members. If this is good for the goose, is it good enough for the gander?
Well, I think that's a big if, particularly when we talk about congressional Republicans. I mean, obviously, we know, for instance, that their impeachment inquiry of the president is still underway, although so far they have remained relatively quiet on that front. But, I would note just last week we saw the House failed to approve a resolution to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in inherent contempt. Of course, looking at the other side of the coin, this is congressional Republicans who continue to insist that they want the special counsel who interviewed President Biden, special counsel Robert Hur. They still are pursuing the tapes of that interview. They want more than just a transcript. So while that inherent contempt vote failed in Congress, in the House just last week, it is not necessarily quieting the calls among congressional Republicans to push for those tapes. Now, granted, this is a completely separate investigation from that of the former president, but also involving the issue of classified documents. So on one hand, while they may be praising this ruling by Judge Aileen Cannon, at the same token, does that mean they will now quiet their concerns with respect to the special counsel Robert Hur's investigation into President Biden? And while, yes, that is concluded, again, we have seen Republicans repeatedly look for ways to try to push the Justice Department for those tapes, even though time and again the Justice Department has said that they are protected by executive privilege and that they are not going to pursue any type of charges against the Attorney General, despite the House's attempt to hold the Attorney General in contempt. Realizing that is separate from what is happening from Hunter Biden, I just use that as an example of how, there are two sides of this coin here when we talk about some of these special counsel investigations.
All right, Nicole Killian for us, reporting from Capitol Hill this morning. Nicole, as always, we appreciate you hustling to the camera for us with this breaking news. And in fact, we've got some news coming into the CBS News Broadcast Center. The former president has actually just posted the Truth Social, and I'm paraphrasing here. Actually, you can probably see it right behind me. No, right there, folks. There it is, coming into one of our newsrooms there, and I can't see which one it is, but they have been able to post that onto the air. I wonder if we can push in on that. Let's push in on that and show our viewers. Oh, there it is. All right. So that's what we're able to do here, right? Breaking news happening all across the newsrooms that CBS owns and operates stations, and if there's something happening, we can bring it up. There is that tweet or whatever they call it on Truth Social from the former president. The Justice Department coordinated all these political attacks, which are an election interference conspiracy against Joe Biden's political opponent, me. Let us come together to end all weaponization of our justice system and make America great again. So that is the former president responding to the fact that Judge Aileen Cannon in Florida has dismissed the classified documents case against him. Let's bring back Jessica Levinson to continue this conversation to talk about what this all means going down the road. Jessica, oh, all right. I'm told we lost Jessica Levinson. Well, let me then thank our contributors, Jessica and Katrina, and also thank our correspondents, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Scott McFarland, who hustled to a camera for us, including Nicole Killian, as the news came into the newsroom. Again, if you're just joining us here at CBS News 24/7, Trump has, or at least the judge that was appointed by former President Donald Trump, has dismissed that classified documents case, which was, by many legal experts, one of the strongest legal cases against the former president. The fact that he had taken classified documents from the White House, from Washington, to his private residence at Mar-a-Lago. That case has now been dismissed by Judge Aileen Cannon.